Let's go back to May 2017. A single piece of malicious software brought the entire world to a grinding halt. Now, this wasn't just another computer virus. This was a full-blown global cyber attack, and it showed us all just how fragile our super-connected world had really become. This is the story of WannaCry.
So, this whole thing didn't start with some big warning or a countdown clock. It just happened. On Friday, May 12, 2017, a digital wildfire started to spread across the globe. What began as just a few isolated incidents quickly, and I mean really quickly, spiraled into a massive crisis.
Within just a few hours, computer screens everywhere, from train stations to businesses to schools, suddenly turned red with this terrifying ransom message. The spread was insane. It jumped from Asia to Latin America and then ripped through Europe, all in the span of a single morning. By lunchtime, it had created a critical life-or-death crisis for the UK's entire health service.
And nowhere was the impact more real, more visceral than inside the UK's National Health Service. As all their critical systems just blinked out, doctors were literally thrown back into a pre-digital dark age. I mean, can you even picture that? A modern hospital, totally paralyzed, forced to track emergency patients on a whiteboard because every single computer was being held hostage?
The sheer scale of this thing was just unprecedented. Over 250,000 computers locked down in less than 24 hours. The speed and the scope of it just left security experts completely stunned. So, what exactly was this digital monster?
To really get what happened, we need to pop the hood and dissect the weapon itself. Because this was not your average, everyday piece of malware. Not even close.
Okay, so at its heart, WannaCry was ransomware. It's a pretty straightforward form of digital extortion. Your files get locked up, and you gotta pay a ransom to get them back. Simple, right? But WannaCry had this devastating twist that made it so much more dangerous.
And here's the crucial difference. Most ransomware needs you, a human, to make a mistake. You know, you click on a bad link in an email, you download a sketchy file. WannaCry didn't need any of that. It was a worm. Once it got inside a single computer on a network, it could spread all by itself, actively hunting for other vulnerable machines with terrifying speed. No clicks needed.
So this is where the story gets really wild. The engine that powered WannaCry was a top-secret cyber weapon called Eternal Blue, and it was built by America's own national security agency. It was stolen from them and then just leaked online for anyone to use. The attackers simply bolted this government-grade weapon onto a regular piece of ransomware and created a monster. But you know the most infuriating part of this whole story? Microsoft had already released a patch to fix this vulnerability. The entire global crisis was preventable. It just didn't have to happen. Just as the world was bracing for an absolutely catastrophic weekend, with the damage just spiraling completely out of control, the attack suddenly stopped. And it was stopped by one person, in a way that is almost too unbelievable to be true.
But before we get to that, let's just be clear on the stakes. The damage was immense, and it was piling up by the minute. For the NHS alone, we're talking tens of millions of pounds and almost 20,000 patient appointments canceled. The stakes could not have been higher.
Meanwhile, a young researcher over in the UK, a guy named Marcus Hutchins, decides he's going to take a look. He starts digging into the malware's code and he finds something, well, something weird. There's this bizarre line of code where the malware was trying to connect to this long, nonsensical web domain that didn't even exist. It was a strange, loose thread in an otherwise devastatingly effective program.
So mostly, just out of sheer curiosity, he decides to register that domain. It cost him $10.69. He had absolutely no idea what he had just done.
He had unknowingly and completely accidentally activated a kill switch. The theory is this was probably a feature designed by the creators to stop the worm if they thought it was being analyzed by researchers. By registering that domain, he basically made the worm think the entire internet was a research lab, so it just shut itself down. Our hero was an accidental one, and for just over $10, the immediate crisis was over.
So, with the fire put out, for now, the investigation pivoted to a brand new mystery. Who did this? And, maybe more importantly, why?
And when you look at the money, the real motive becomes crystal clear. You'd think for an attack that caused an estimated $4 billion in global damage, the payday would be huge, right? Well, it wasn't. They collected less than $200,000 in ransom. This was never, ever about the money. This was about causing chaos on a global scale.
So investigators started following the digital breadcrumbs, and they all led back to one place.
The code itself looked eerily familiar, matching malware from huge attacks like the Sony Pictures hack. They even got a little sloppy and reused some of the same digital infrastructure. The evidence trail pointed directly to a notorious state-sponsored hacking group known as the Lazarus Group, which is widely believed to operate on behalf of North Korea.
The attack may have been stopped, but the aftershocks completely changed the conversation around cybersecurity. For a lot of people, this was the moment the threat stopped being theoretical and became very, very real. And security experts all agree. As Wendy Whitmore from IBM's X-Force said, WannaCry was a huge wake-up call. When even these giant companies with good security teams could be brought to their knees, everyone else finally started paying attention. And the threat didn't just vanish. I mean, get this. Years later, in early 2020, copycat versions of the attack and systems that were still unpatched meant that WannaCry variants made up a massive chunk of all ransomware attacks out there. The ghost of this thing was still haunting the internet.
So, when you boil it all down, the lessons we were supposed to learn from all this chaos are pretty simple, but they are absolutely vital. Patch your systems. Practice basic security hygiene. Keep your backups offline, disconnected from the main network. And above all else, WannaCry proved, once and for all, that digital threats have very real, very physical consequences in our world. Ultimately, WannaCry was a global stress test that we, as a planet, pretty much failed. It exposed just how fragile and vulnerable our interconnected society really is. The code for the next global cyber attack is probably already written. The real question is, are we any safer today than we were then?